After Effects, or like before effects. I don't even know what that means. Let's learn the program.
Perfect.
All right, here we go. Exciting times ahead. Welcome to this 10-part series about the foundation of After Effects. So what we're going to be doing in this course is going through an example kind of like this, or exactly like this. We will be breaking down every single step it took to create that animation. So we'll go through everything from design to animation to expressions, compositing, 2D, 3D, 2.5D. What does it all mean? Well, follow along on this 10-part journey and you'll be able to go from super basics of After Effects all the way to creating a cool flying spaceship in a live action environment, incorporate everything together, and it's going to be super cool, super fun, and you'll learn a whole bunch of stuff. So let's go. After Effects can be used for explainer videos, motion graphics, visual effects, compositing, 2D, 3D, sort of. We'll get there when we get there. It can be used for marketing videos, it can be used for TV production, it can be used for big Hollywood blockbuster movies. It's really used in a lot of different spaces. Let's try to lock down what After Effects isn't. So it can be used for a lot of things, but is it the best tool for all of those things? Maybe, maybe not. What After Effects isn't is it's not a real node-based compositing program. It's not really a real 3D program. It's not really a cell animation or frame-by-frame animation program. It's not really an editing program. And it's not really a sound design program. So I like to think of After Effects as a Swiss Army knife of software. It has a lot of different tools that you can use for different use cases. And where After Effects also really shines is when you start to upgrade it with external things like plugins and scripts and extensions. And there's a whole community around After Effects building tools that in some scenarios maybe should be included in After Effects by default, but somebody else has had to build that on their own. And those things can be either free or paid. And there's a lot of really, really talented people out there creating amazing stuff. So I really recommend that once you cover the basics, cover the foundation of After Effects, start to explore the different communities and see what other tools are out there. We'll cover a bunch of that stuff in later upcoming tutorials. For now, we're sticking purely with vanilla After Effects. So if you've never used the program before, you just got it installed, that's everything you're going to need for everything that we're doing in this whole series. So we'll start off by just talking about the interface itself. Right now, it can be kind of confusing when you first dive into the program and you're not really sure where to go. But you do have two pretty clear buttons right here, and that is New Composition or New Composition from Footage. In this case, we don't really have any footage that we're importing and that we want to use as a starting point. We want to start completely from scratch. And to be able to actually animate or do anything inside of After Effects, you need to have what is called a composition. You can think of that as a scene or a stage or an empty Photoshop document. So we'll fire away on the New Composition button. And immediately you're greeted with a button and have to make some choices. And right away here, we start to get into a little bit of the more technical side of things. That's not really After Effects specific, but is more about video production stuff in general. And that's what you need to figure out here. All of these settings can be changed after the fact, but the more you know from the start, the better, especially when you start to do more complex stuff. So to help you out, there are a number of presets down here. A couple of them up here even cover standard definition before HD was a thing. So that will show you a bit of how old After Effects actually is. I will just go ahead and select let's go for HDTV 1080 24. And now you'll see what has changed is my width is set to 1920, my height is set to 1080, which means that it's HD video, 1920 by 1080, 1080p. And because I selected the one called 24 at the end, it set my frame rate to 24 frames per second. And If we just look at number 1 over here, we have the project window. This is where you'll be gathering all of your different assets and elements, and everything that goes into your project will be saved over here in the project panel. And the number 1 rule that I think everybody should follow is always make sure that you're naming your layers and your compositions and everything else so that you know what it is. Or if somebody else is going to open up your project file in the future, they know what that is. So comp 1, okay name, but we can name it to be my first super cool composition. And now that's updated down here in the timeline, and there we go. So what you need to know in the composition window really is, right now we selected a background color, but if we go down to this little button down here, toggle transparency grid, when I click that, you'll see we get the same transparency grid that Photoshop and Illustrator and other Adobe programs use, just to indicate that there actually isn't any layer right here. If we click that again, we'll see that gray color that we selected, but that's not actually a layer within After Effects. That is just a preset background color that is used to show you that this is the rectangle where your composition is. And if you want to change that color, you can go up to composition settings, and just change the background color to be a red color instead. And you'll see now we have a red background. All right, on to the timeline. The timeline is what we have down here at the bottom. And this is where you'll be spending the majority of your time inside of After Effects. This is where you will be having all of your layers, all your keyframes, all of the graph editing and the fun stuff down here to really create those animations that pop and shine, jazz, and look sweet. And that will be happening right down here in the timeline. And the little blue stick here is what is called the current time indicator. And if I just drag that over to the right, you will see that over here the seconds change, and I can see seconds up here, I can see frames down here, and I can go all the way to the end, which is going to be 10 seconds. And here's a first little logical thing that you have to consider when working in After Effects. We're working with 24 frames per second, which means that there's 24 frames per second. So if we go to the very, very end, you might expect it to say 10:00, but it actually says 09:23. And that is because the very, very first frame is 0. So we do have the correct amount of frames and the correct amount of seconds in this composition. But that's just one of those things that you have to watch out for. Next one up here, we have the info panel. And this one is actually docked with the one called audio. So you can see there are 2 different tabs here. And the nice thing about After Effects interface is that you can both dock tabs like this, but you can also select an entire tab, just click and hold and drag it. And then you get these blue little drop zones that show you that you can drop this info panel, which is the one I have selected at the moment. I can drop this anywhere in my workspace. So I'm just going to let that go over there. And now my info panel is over here. My audio panel is over here, which was docked with the info one before. And if I want to dock them again, I can just take the audio one, drag that over here to this blue drop zone here. If I let go, they are now docked together again. And I can move them around like that. And all of the windows can be sized like this, so the whole interface is very responsive, and that is one of those things that are really nice, because that means that you can really customize your workspace to exactly the way that you want it to be, and you're not locked into whatever the Adobe folks thought that you should have. In the info panel, which is the one that we have up at the moment, you can see that when I move my mouse around, the X and Y values are changing. And the reason that they're changing is that this is an interactive little window that shows you the X and Y position. To figure out what the RGBA things in the info panel mean, we do need to have a layer on screen. And to get a layer created, I will just simply go to the rectangle tool, and I will draw a rectangle. And you can see now that I'm getting a blue rectangle because that is the last color that I used when I created a shape layer. So down here in the timeline, we have something new called shape layer 1. It is a blue rectangle. And if you want to change the color of that, you'll see that up here, we've now been greeted with a fill and a stroke property. We'll get into those in much more detail later, but for now, if you don't have one that is blue, you probably have a different color up here. And if you want to change that color, you can just click on the color swatch and change it to whatever color you want. And now when I hover my mouse cursor, if you look in the info panel, you'll see that the X and Y values are changing just like before. But when I now hover over my rectangle, what I'm getting is the RGBA values. And you'll see that the R, the red color, is 0. The G for green is 22, and the B for blue is 255. And everything is in order as it should be, because that is the RGB values of this color that I created. But you'll also see the A, and the A actually stands for the alpha channel. And this comes back to the transparency thing that I showed you before. So if we click on the transparency button again, you'll see that the red color for the background, again, isn't a real layer. It is just a background color, but the blue rectangle is a layer. And when I move that around, you'll see that the rectangle is blue, but the background stays transparent. And if you look in the info panel again, you will see that the A is currently set to 0. So the alpha is 0, but when I hover over my rectangle, the alpha is 255. And that is the maximum value when working in 8 bits per channel. So between 0 and 255, that is the value range that a color can move, including the alpha channel. So that's the info panel. Audio, we're not going to be working with audio for the moment. So if I go to the little hamburger icon up here, I can click on that and I can just say close panel, and now I can get rid of the audio panel. Let's have a look at the next one, the preview panel. And this one looks more complicated than it needs to be from your very first use of After Effects. If we just take our time indicator and drag that all the way to the beginning, we don't currently have any animation, but if I were to click the play button, I would have the timeline playing here. And right now nothing is happening because, again, we haven't actually animated anything, but we will be getting there soon. I can also not use the play button, but there is a shortcut here called spacebar, and that is the spacebar on your keyboard. So if I hit spacebar, I'm getting the same thing happening. And what's nice about the preview panel is that I can actually set a bunch of different types of previews. So for my shortcut for spacebar, I can include play video and preview. I can play audio and preview. I can show overlays if I want to. I can change all of these settings here. So what's nice about this is that you can have one preview where you're previewing everything, including the audio. Then you can have a different shortcut. So if you're doing shift spacebar, for example, that is set to by default is to do a preview, but not to include the audio. So if you hit shift spacebar, it's only going to be previewing the video itself without the audio. What you see down here is that the frame rate is 24, but it also has a skip feature, and that's set to 1 by default when we're using the shift spacebar shortcut. So if I go back to spacebar, frame rate is 24, skip is 0. But if I go to shift spacebar, it is frame rate 24, but skip is set to 1. And what that means that it will skip every other frame, essentially giving you a preview at half the frame rate, which would be 12 frames per second. What's nice about that is that when you start to create more complex compositions in After Effects with a ton of layers, ton of keyframes, a ton of stuff going on, you really need to optimize the software to be able to give you the preview that you need to get out of the thing you're looking at. Next one we have on screen is the effects and presets, and this is one that we'll be covering in much more detail in an upcoming video. But for now, you can just think of this as similar to the filter menu in Photoshop. This is a list of filters or effects, as they're called in After Effects, that allow you to do a bunch of cool stuff. And you can also save your presets in here. So it's one window for effects and presets. And we can just stick to having our workspace kind of like this. Maybe I don't need to have the info panel up here. Or actually, I don't need to have the info panel at all now that we've covered what it does. So I will just close that. And now I have a clean and large workspace that I can actually start using to do whatever I want to do in here. On my shape layer 1 over here, I will see that there's some stuff down in the timeline. And what I'm interested in finding right now is within the transform controls, there are a couple things that come by default for pretty much every single layer in After Effects, except audio files. Here you have something called anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. So to get a bit more context of what the anchor point actually does, I will move it down here to this corner. And if I now go to the rotation property and I rotate it, you will see that it's rotating from that anchor point. So if I just leave that as it is, and we'll set that back to 0 actually, and I will move the anchor point to roughly the center, and I rotate now, you'll see that it's now rotating from the center. Move that over here, it's now rotating from over there. So we already covered rotation. We can also scale the layer, and that's also going to be scaling from the anchor point. So wherever I move the anchor point, it's scaling from there. We can of course move the position, and we can change the opacity between 0 and 100%. And these are the main components of how you can move things in After Effects. You can change the values down here, or you can select the move tool, just move your layer around, and you'll also see down in the timeline the position value is changing because I'm currently changing the position itself of the layer. After Effects round 1 is done. We got through it. You know the program in and out. Maybe not really, but you got the foundation down. And now we're really getting into the fun stuff, because now we're gonna start animating. So hit the link for part number 2. And if you just wanna stick around and see what else I'm up to on this channel, After Effects tips and tricks, other art tips and tricks, stick around, subscribe, and
perfect.